Today we're focusing on inclusivity and diversity from both the fire service and the police, as well as performance of both services. And we're also going to take a look at FOI and subject access request compliance as well. So thank you everybody for coming today. It is appreciated. Again, to go now for attendance and apologies. And I think we have apologies from the Deputy Chief Constable, Phil Kane, today. In terms of minutes of the meeting and previous actions, there are no minutes of the meeting because people can review the entire proceedings on the YouTube channel. So if people want to watch it and pick up on anything, they can. And we have no matters arising. So I'm going to go into the first substantive agenda item, which is questions from the public. And we have one question from a Mrs. Judith Stansfield, who is the chair of Melsonby Parish Council. And her question is around public access using technology for policing. So her question is how are inclusion and diversity served when the PCSO can't use Zoom? We're told that he could come to Teams, but Teams are not easily accessible by the general public. Judith, I share your concern on this, and I have previously asked questions about it, because I think it's incumbent on us all to make it as easy as possible for the police and the public to engage and talk with one another. Who from North Yorkshire Police is going to answer this question? Have we got anybody who's going to answer it?
So Julia, I'm able to answer that question from a North Yorkshire Police perspective. So thank you for your question, Judith, and I'm sorry that you are in this situation. To explain the background, Zoom as a system is not a secure network. So there are lots of bodies that use it, but from a security perspective, you would expect as a police service that we absolutely want to maintain the security and integrity of data that's held on our systems. So when Zoom is looked at as a system from a policing perspective, it's not secure, and therefore we don't generally use it because people can enter into that meeting that's taking place, and we might be discussing confidential information, for example, and I'm quite sure as the public you would want us to protect the confidentiality of those things that we sometimes discuss as a service. However, there are some circumstances such as public meetings, and the Home Affairs Select Committee use Zoom. So there are public forums where something is going to be in the public domain anyway, where it's quite safe for us to use Zoom because the information that we're sharing is already in the public domain because it's a public facing meeting. So in those circumstances, individuals can request access to Zooms to specifically use it for those forums where we're not going to breach any confidentiality by sharing public information on that system. So I'm sorry that you were in this situation. We can provide Zoom access to those individuals to use specifically for public meetings. So thank you for your patience, but we will be able to sort that out for you so that your police community support officers or other members of our team can correspond and communicate with your parish council through Zoom in future. So thank you for your question and for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Chief. Tom, you've got a comment you want to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Lisa, in that case, would it be worth maybe, I don't know whether there's any plans to kind of reaffirm that message to local policing teams just so that they are doubly aware of the fact that they can attend public meetings via Zoom and the process by which they can request that so that they can do that.
That's a really good point, Tom. And yes, we can do that.
I also wonder, though, whether it might be worth just re-looking at the policy. I think you may have to go to PSD and get permission and all sorts of stuff. And I do wonder, it reminds me a little bit of the nervousness around social media a few years ago, and I just wonder whether we just might want to. It's quite a risk-averse approach, I think, assuming that police officers are going to use Zoom for something they shouldn't be using it for, which means that they're not using it for the things that they could be using it for. And I just wonder whether it's worth just reassessing that policy a little bit.
Absolutely, yes, Julia, and perhaps not providing much assurance, but I myself have had to ask for specific permission to have Zoom on my equipment because of some public meetings. So this isn't something that's just the case for our frontline staff. It's an organisational policy, as you say, Julia, that needs to be reviewed.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Well, I think it's a really great opportunity, though, because the public have got used to using these things, and you know, we could really make the most of it. So I think that it's a great question. So thank you very much, Judith Stansfield, for that, and hopefully it will be a little bit easier in the future. Okay, so I'm now going to go on to item agenda 4, which is a presentation from the Fire and Rescue Service. Andrew, I think you're leading this around inclusion and diversity. Is that right?
That's right, Julia. I shall share my screen and I shall take you through the presentation. There. Are you able to see that?
Yes, but it's not going on to slideshow.
It's not going on to slideshow, and I'm not sure why. Let me close it. I'll bring it back up again. Technical difficulties at this end, which I will resolve momentarily.
So Andrew, we were having a little practice with some presentations beforehand and there were a few issues. So I don't know, Tom, do you have the presentation?
I do, I can share it.
Is that all right, Andrew?
Yeah, I've made a couple of tweaks to it, but it's fine. I'll be able to use the one that Tom's going to show.
Thanks. Let's hope that Tom's works.
Normally works well, that, doesn't it?
There we go.
Have I got control of this now, Tom?
You don't, but I'm more than happy. You just tell me when you need me to move on.
We've all heard it at the government briefings. Next slide, please.
Next slide, please. Then I shall be Professor Whitty.
Okay.
So I'm not really going to talk through this. This is just a demonstration of why culture is so important, and of course, inclusion and diversity is very much a part of the organisation's culture. Our inclusivity and how kind of diverse we are in terms of our attitudes, our thoughts, our workforce, and the services that we deliver. And there's a lovely phrase about culture eating strategy for breakfast, and I think it's very true. It's all well and good. I can have all of the strategies, all of the plans that I like. Without a workforce that is diverse enough, with the right behaviours, values and attitudes to deliver that strategy and those plans, it needn't exist. So making sure that we've got an organisation that values diversity, that values different ways of thinking, people from lots of different backgrounds, and recognises the need to deliver our services in a very diverse way and not have a broad brush approach to delivering services, but be capable of delivering services that are tailored to individual needs of households and communities. So that's why getting equality, diversity and inclusion right is so important for us as a fire and rescue service. So you want to flick through, Tom, to the next one. And last year, as many people will know, we had our first inspection by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of what became Constabulary's Fire and Rescue Services. And they looked at our culture in quite a lot of depth. There were 3 key parts to their inspection. They looked at efficiency and effectiveness, which was very much about the delivery of our services. But they also looked at people, the way we treat our people and the way we treat people in communities and look after them, whilst making sure, of course, that they're doing everything they can to keep communities safe. And the good things that they said about our culture were that we had values that were focused on delivering public service, and staff on the whole, and it's important that those words, on the whole, embrace them. It's a bit like having a look at a school report. You've got to read between the lines of what the teacher's actually saying. So staff on the whole embrace them. There are historical tensions, and that was particularly acute between the representative of bodies and the senior management of the organisation. But despite that, what the inspectorate said was it was still a place where the workforce felt able to give feedback of all types to senior managers. And it takes workforce well-being seriously and has effective support systems in place. And it's really important there, it touches upon physical and mental well-being, because all of those are about health, our mental health and our physical health. And there is lots of work that we carry out day to day, week to week, which is about looking after the mental and physical health of our workforce. And we have teams in place to make sure that that's done well. Next slide, please, Tom. But they also had this to say about the culture of North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. It requires improvement in the way that we look after our people. It's unclear how the values benefit the organisation by promoting diversity. And what you'll learn later in the presentation, you obviously already know, Julia, but what the public will learn later in the presentation is that we've begun to launch new values for the Fire and Rescue Service, and there will be a formal launch in the coming weeks. And that will very much be about making sure that diversity, equality is promoted across the service, that addresses that point of the inspectorate's thoughts. A lack of understanding about the benefits of diversity, and I see this, and I know that people see this when we're out and about. There is a dearth of understanding within our workplaces about why it's important. It's a culture that's kind of decades old in the Fire and Rescue Service that is going to take a long time to turn around. There are many good aspects of our culture, of course, but there are other aspects of it that need to be improved, and that workforce education is an important part of that. A male-oriented culture and language being used at station level. People still in 2020 referring to firemen and working with the lads. Language that we challenge every single time we hear it. I challenge that language when I'm in the workplace. I challenge that language in my day-to-day life when people use terms like that, like fireman, and never do I let that go without challenging it back, no matter who it is. And if we're going to have workplaces that feel friendly and welcoming to any single person, it's got to be a workplace where the language is inclusive. Otherwise, it's not going to feel inclusive. We haven't got a very diverse workforce, and positive news about this to come later, but only 4.7, fewer than 5% of our firefighters are women, and 0.5% non-white British. That's despite, of course, a 50% population, which is women, 51%. And in North Yorkshire and York, 3.4% of the population are from a non-white background. So we're not reflective of our community. That's at the firefighter level. In the enabling services part of our service, we are much more representative, particularly around gender, but we've got a long way to go in terms of the operational workforce, the response workforce. And I think this next point is perhaps still true to an extent. This last selection process, we've had a large focus on gender diversity, but I think probably less of a focus, if I'm honest, on Black and Asian minority ethnic background groups. And I think next year when we go into this, we've got to place an equal emphasis on those groups of people as we do on gender. And something as basic as uniform issue. They identified that there were women who were buying their own uniform because they couldn't get well-fitting uniform from within the service. And this is important. I remember research from a long time ago that said how important good fitting, good quality uniform was to people's feelings of worth and value in the workplace. And if we're going to get people coming in with the right attitudes, values and behaviours at work every day, we've got to make sure that they've got the simple, basic hygiene factors addressed. And we are, if I took you to Transport and Logistics Hub this minute, you would see a small team of people putting together all of the new corporate workwear, all of the new uniform that people will wear for issue to stations over the coming days. And we are transforming the way that we provide uniform. And there's been an enormous effort in that procurement to make sure that the needs of women and everybody else in the workforce inclusively are considered. But HMIC basically found lots of flaws in our culture, which affects ultimately the services that we deliver, what we exist to do. So the next slide, Tom, says it all, I think. Change is needed. So the next slide on, please, Tom. And when I look at this and consider what we do well in being able to deliver that change, we've got to be in a place where change is possible. I think this is what we do well. We recognise the need for change and are very, very willing to tackle it. As a senior team, and I know all the way into the tactical leadership team, our support from enabling services and your support, Julia, as the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, I know that there is, I suppose, a dedication to tackling the problems that we've got around diversity and inclusion. We've developed brilliant relationships with the representative of our bodies, the Fire Brigades Union and Unison in particular, and there is a shared desire there to improve. So the Fire Brigades Union, for example, are absolutely on board with this journey locally and nationally, because they recognise the need that every one of their members, when they come into work every day, needs to feel included within that workforce, and they're very keen that we're delivering brilliant services, because of course it secures our future. We've developed staff networks within an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Board, which I'll describe later, and they're developing a clear purpose and influence, and they're going to be far more influential into the organisation, into the service, but also really importantly into groups that they represent as well. And there's a growing and improving approach to positive action in recruitment. I'm going to talk a bit more about recruitment later, but we have got this year, just emerging as we speak, a very positive picture emerging on improved results from the improvements that we've made. Next slide, please, Tom. What challenges have we got? Well, attracting diversity with a workforce that largely is white, male and British is not easy. People want to come into a place where they feel part of it, where they don't feel like they'll be the odd one out. So there's a need to get to some sort of a critical mass of diversity where it's not unusual to come and work for the fire service if you're not from the traditional group that has tended to apply. So we've really got to break the back of this so that it's typical to see a person of colour. It's typical to see a woman on a fire engine, in a fire station, in a school, in a workplace, delivering our services. The behaviours and the acceptance of their difference. Too often in the past and currently, we are having to deal with the results of people's poor behaviour. It has lots of impacts on the organisation. Is it a financial impact? Because we sometimes have to pay compensation effectively to members of staff who have been mistreated. As well as that, we lose those members of staff. They leave the service, and all of that investment in them, in their training, their development, is lost the day that they walk out. And it is simply unacceptable for anybody to treat anybody in a way that is not inclusive, diverse. It shouldn't be about picking on people. It shouldn't be about having a bullying culture. It should be about a culture where people come into work every day, feel welcome and feel welcomed. And of course, that exists in lots of parts of our organisation. It's the norm, but there are too many pockets and too many examples of bad behaviour leading to action having to be taken. I see Fiona's popped her hand up. Julia, I don't know if you want to bring questions in now.
Yes, please.
Hi, Andrew. It was just to clarify. You said earlier that you that you would go out and challenge unacceptable behaviour. Do you think that other staff feel that they can also do that amongst their colleagues? And I'd just be interested in knowing whether you have a whistleblowing policy for dealing with such circumstances.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, we do have a whistleblowing policy. On Thursday this week, we've got a huge planning day, and we're going to be looking at all of the work that we need to do over the next 4 or 5 years. I would imagine that somebody will have a thought about how effective that whistleblowing policy is, and if it's deemed to not be effective, then it would go into the plan for review and revision within that 4-year plan. I'd expect that one to be important and to be a priority. It's not used often, the whistleblowing policy. And there's a few ways to think about that. One is to think, OK, so it's not necessary because people do feel able to challenge behaviour and to report poor behaviour in an open and transparent way. And that's the way I would like it to be. I would love it if nobody felt a need to use a whistleblowing policy because they feel supported in being able to raise their concerns in an open and frank way. But when they do fear that there might be repercussions, yes, definitely there's a whistleblowing policy there, and we will review it to see to check its suitability.
Andrew, Andrew, do you know how many times it's been used in the last year?
I don't off the top of my head, Julia. In fact, I'm sitting here wondering. I'm aware of one example, but there might be more. But I'm also aware, Julia, interestingly, of somebody waiting until they left the service before they raised a concern. And that, of course, is a worry, because that's an example of somebody who neither felt comfortable raising it through a whistleblowing approach, nor comfortable raising it through the normal channels. So that's something that we have to consider as to just how open people are to sharing their concerns. I hate the thought of people coming to work unhappy, feeling that they're not being treated appropriately, but not being able to raise those concerns.
And we get people raising them with us as well. So I might suggest then that perhaps one of the actions out of this is to just have a look at that whistleblowing policy and how effective it is. Would that be possible?
Absolutely, that's possible. I can take that myself into the planning day on Thursday, and we can identify that as a need for high priority review.
Yeah, thanks.
What are the challenges? Education. So often the education that's been provided has been kind of a chalk and talk, and it turns people off. And there's lots of evidence that hearing people's lived experiences is the most effective way to help people to understand the need for good approaches towards inclusion and diversity. So we're working now with Enable North Yorkshire to develop a new programme of education for the entire workforce that will help them understand the need for that type of approach. And also, I'm going to be talking later about the new values that I'm introducing to the service. What we're currently asking our workforce to do is to come up with the behaviours that they expect to see and expect not to see if we're to live those new values. And kind of disappointingly, initially the response has been quite low, quite poor. So we've extended the time that's available for people to provide a response, and we are encouraging through the management teams in the organisation people to come back to us, because it's so important that comes from the ground, that comes from the people who will be measured, who will be monitored. We need to know that the behaviours that they are expected to live to are the very behaviours that they expect to see. And I'm hopeful that we'll get an improved response. And if people don't respond, then when they are challenged on their behaviours and not complying with the ones that have been set, it's them who've missed out the opportunity to influence them. And getting better internally, improve service delivery. That's one of the challenges. One of my new values is we value people. We put the public first. And this is about changing around the culture, the challenge of changing the culture to one that's less introspective. We make sure that we're okay before we look outside and think about the public, to one that puts the public first. One where when there's a choice of what needs to be done, we do the thing that gets the public safe, helping them to be safe and feel safe. Society's norms and expectations are a challenge. We still have a society that considers the fire service to be white, male dominated and quite a closed culture. And that is something that we work hard to educate the public. We work hard to demonstrate, to show them visually that we are a more diverse workforce. And that's where this critical mass bit that I talked about comes into its own. When people see larger numbers of people from from currently underrepresented groups, then it will become more and more the norm, and it will become self-fulfilling. Our buildings are not fit for purpose in too many cases. You've heard me talk about this before, Julia. We've just done an estate survey to identify where we would be best to invest in improving our estate. Today, our estate on paper meets the needs of our workforce, but it would only take a small increase in diversity that no longer becomes able to do that. So what I've made clear is when we're prioritising the work on the estates, we don't wait for the diversity to increase before we invest in that improvement. We invest in the improvement in preparation for the increase in diversity. It's kind of horse before the cart, if you like. I don't want it to be too late before somebody arrives in a fire station and then we suddenly think about providing the basic needs that that person needs. And future financing is going to be an enormous challenge. We were already challenged financially here in North Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service. We've worked hard to get into a balanced budget position, but we can fully expect that we will face further constraints as the government deals with the financial impact of the coronavirus pandemic, and as we deal with lower income from council tax and business rates as people become less able to pay that. So this type of investment.
Just ask a question then. So there's, you know, obviously we've had a discussion around the estates situation, and at the end of the day, we're going to have to make, because the financing is really difficult.
Yeah.
We're going to have to make decisions around priorities, and you know, I can imagine that you know, people will be saying, well, why would you want to, you know, put the needs of sort of, you know, diversity before the needs of firefighters, numbers of firefighters, or firefighters having equipment, or whatever it is. How do you answer that question?
Well, we'll do everything that we can to maintain, as far as we can, the current levels of service that we deliver. But of course, though, that service is improved, as we've already discussed, by having a diverse workforce. Because that diverse workforce has more diverse ideas, it better understands the very people that we exist to serve. So what would not be the thing to do would be to ignore the need to improve diversity simply to maintain our current levels of service. We need to improve our current levels of service. And that requires investment in a number of areas. One of those areas is in things like our buildings and our positive action work and our education of the workforce, because we need to look at the long-term impact of equality and diversity, the long-term impact of cultural change, and the long-term impact of financial investment. So what I wouldn't want to do is lose sight of the benefits that we would get in the medium to long term simply to protect the short-term scale of our existing service. We'll be better once we're more diverse, and we see every day the benefits of having a diverse workforce, and they'll only be magnified as we get better at it. And what I don't want this to be, I suppose, this is, and I'm often accused of this, lots of people are, that this is anti-current workforce, and it's just nothing of the sort. We have a fantastic workforce in the main. I've already described that sometimes we find problems with individuals who don't behave as they should. When you employ 750 people, it's almost inevitable that will happen from time to time. This is not about bashing the existing workforce or saying that they don't do a good job. This is about saying, taking that workforce and supplementing it with greater diversity in future will make it even better. And that's a really important point to make. I don't want anybody to watch this and think that we're anti-white male firefighters. We are nothing of the sort. What we are is pro improving the diversity of our workforce in future. We'll move to the next slide, please, Tom. So what opportunities have we got? The first three of these, there's a slide on, and I think this is the change, Tom. So we're going to have to skip back and forwards a little bit on this one. So the first slide, if you go forward, is the Risk and Resource Model and Ambition 2025. And this is the document that I've produced that sets out our direction over the next 5 years. It sets out where we can be in 2025 as a better fire and rescue service, and what the key opportunities and the key obstacles are in getting there. But this is this is a passage lifted directly from Ambition 2025, and this is about culture, behaviours, values, attitudes. It's about being accountable but empowered. It's about working in partnership and not seeing ourselves as a silo organisation. It's about people knowing what they come to work to do, putting the public first and being properly rewarded for doing so. And that's particularly looking toward the on-call service that I often described as being paying as we pay a pittance and we expect the earth. I'd like to improve that. It's being a single team, not thinking that the silos that are sometimes seen in enabling services, officers, firefighters, community safety teams, fire protection teams are all separate, but actually we're a single team that works together in the interests of delivering the best possible services to the public and enabling those services. It's fully inclusive. One of the new values is we value inclusivity. We value inclusion. We will remove barriers that prevent people from joining our service or accessing our services, and where we can identify really talented people and develop them for future roles or develop them within the role that they're doing. So that's the kind of a culture aspect of the future delivery of Ambition 2025 and our fire and rescue service. So if you can skip back a slide.
Sorry, Anne. Where do you think you are now then against this?
Well, I set that out. If you'll remember the 100-day report, Julia, we are not starting from zero. We are starting from a place where this journey has already started. So, but traditionally, people in the fire and rescue service, firefighters, for example, can, if they choose, come to work, wait to be told what to do, get on and do that, and once it's done, wait to be told the next thing to do, and go through their days and their careers like that. And I'm keen to turn that around, and there's loads of examples of this happening now, of people coming in and self-starting, self-generating their work. I received a brilliant presentation last week from a firefighter at Northallerton who listened to me talk about Ambition 2025 and thought to himself, do you know what? As a 20-year career firefighter, I'm not coming in and self-starting and focusing first on my community. And that firefighter has taken the opportunity to relook at what we call SSRI, sites of special interest, the buildings which provide us with the greatest risk. And he, in Northallerton, has produced an entirely new model for capturing, recording and presenting that risk information, which will make that crew and those crews, and if it's spread across the service, everybody better able to respond to incidents and to do the learning about those risk sites to be able to respond to those incidents. So there are green shoots emerging all over the place, Commissioner, which gives me real confidence that while we're not where we need to be today, that we're started on that journey. If you click through to the next slide, please, Tom. These are the new values. This is a colossal opportunity. We're starting to embed these new values in everything that we do. John Foster was sending a message out today to all members of staff to remind them about the approach to detachments to other stations during the COVID crisis and their responsibilities about that. Embedded within that communication is a reminder that we value people, we put the public first. So before thinking about ourselves, the most important thing is keeping fire engines available and crews available to deliver prevention, protection, response and resilience services. So every opportunity that we've got at the moment, we are getting these values embedded. And they are those 5. And these are clearly linked to Ambition 2025. We value people. We value the people in our workforce and the people in our communities, the people in our partner organisations and in our suppliers. So people, we exist to serve the public, we put people first. And that's that bit I talked about turning around, where rather than a fire service that sorts itself out before it starts to think about the public, we come to work and we put the public at the forefront of our minds, making sure, of course, that our mental and physical well-being is looked after so that we're able to do that. We value results. We will become an organisation that evaluates the work that we do and cares about the results that we achieve and is willing to stop and shift our focus to where we know it is a greater effect. We value inclusion. We remove barriers, I said that earlier, that exclude people joining or accessing our services. Inclusion is at the heart of our new values. We value creativity, and this is this opportunity to self-start, people to come into work and be encouraged to be creative, encouraged to overcome obstacles that they might always have thought, well, it's not my job, or what if, but actually be encouraged to be creative and perhaps take some risk in a controlled manner. And then we value learning, which is of course clearly linked to creativity, because when something works well, brilliant, we will share that. When something works less well, fine, we will share it. We won't set out to fail, we'll set out to succeed. But when we learn that things could have gone better, we will evaluate it, we'll reflect, and we will share so that we can be better the next time. Fiona's popped her hand up again. Julia.
Yes, thanks, Fiona. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, Andrew, I'm interested in the inclusion value, and just in terms of removing barriers that exclude people, that obviously will apply to some of your policies and procedures. So have you or do you routinely impact assess your policies and procedures as business as usual, or if they haven't been, will you look to revisit those?
Thanks, Fiona. I think it's fair to say that there's room for improvement in terms of people impact assessments. They've traditionally been called equality impact assessments, and I've changed that to people impact assessments because people don't really get what the equality bit of equality impact assessment is. It's an impact on, it's an assessment of the impact on people, the people who work with us and the people that we serve and the people that we work alongside. So there will be two types of people impact assessment, a partial and a full, depending on the scale, the level of impact that it's going to have. And whoever is running the piece of work to produce the guidance, the policy, the procedure, to deliver the project will be responsible for the people impact assessment. But they'll be able to come into the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion group and get direct expertise from them in developing those full people impact assessments. And that planning day that's taking place on Thursday that I spoke about, that will look at policy, procedure and guidance and the review and revision of that. And as that gets done over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that will all be people impact assessed to the appropriate level. Hopefully that answers your question, Fiona. And I see, Julia, you've got your hand up now.
Yeah, so Andrew, I mean, it's interesting. I've worked in organisations where they have had a sort of regular system, if you like, for reviewing policies and procedures, so that they don't just sort of sit there on the blocks, if you like, gathering dust, because often they are written quite a long time ago. And the world's moved on, and all of the rest of it. I wonder whether there's some room for something that is more systematic around reviewing policies and procedures, and as well as the sort of the EDI considerations, there's also the wider considerations around the values per se, and I suspect that there are some policies and procedures that don't, for example, encourage and promote creativity. So obviously it has to be in the context of appropriate risk management. But I just wonder if there is, it's interesting that you are picking that up at the meeting, but a formal way of doing that might be worthwhile.
Thanks, Julie. And yes, we have that process. So there's a process for systematic, regular reviews of all of our policy, procedure and guidance. Under the old system, which I've subsequently changed, that was reported into the strategic leadership team, and on a monthly basis, well, it was called the Corporate Management Board. On a monthly basis, we would get a report which said how up to date we are with keeping up to date with the reviews of those policies, procedures and guidance. That now goes into the tactical leadership team that John oversees. But I do wonder, if I'm honest, whether at the strategic level we might have taken our eye off the ball a little bit on that, and we'll pick that back up again on Thursday when we plan that review of all of the work that's to come over the next few years. What we'll end up with on Thursday is effectively a Gantt chart of all of the different activities, all of the different packages of work that we'll need to do. We'll prioritise them, and we will have a plan over the next 4 years of what will be delivered when, and I would fully anticipate that that review process and making sure that the values that EDI are considered in those reviews of policy, procedure and guidance will be included in that work.
Thanks. And John's got his hand up, Andrew.
John?
You're on mute, John.
Review of policies. As Andrew said there, we do look at these at leadership. It's been recognised that there is a need now under the new arrangements of Enable to review policies across into the new arrangements to make sure that actually not only our own values are captured within those policies, but also those of enabling services, and also broaden that into North Yorkshire Police. So it is a piece of work that we are sighted on, and it needs to take place, and we're working with Enable to accomplish it.
Thanks.
Thanks, John. Tom, can you click back, I think, 3 slides, please? That's the one. That's the one. So those are 3 key opportunities I've just talked about. And just more briefly, the opportunity around having Enable North Yorkshire with the knowledge, the capacity that they have got and the resilience that they provide. So we will be better as a result of having access to that larger team with greater experience. Opportunity around recruitment. We're going to be recruiting year on year on year for the next 3, 4, 5 years, because we look at the retirement profile of the workforce and we know that we're going to be replacing large numbers of people. We are about to, or we will soon be issuing offers of work to 30 new full-time firefighters. That's nearly 10% of the full-time firefighter workforce. So in a single year. So over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, we will have an opportunity to really attract a lot of diversity into our teams. The On-Call Futures Review, I talked about paying a pittance and expecting the out of on-call firefighters. I would love us to get into place a system that attracts a lot of people who've never been attracted into the on-call service before. In our rural communities, there are people from all sorts of different backgrounds in workplaces, in homes, every day. And I would love us to get a system that attracts them to come and be on-call firefighters and support their local community. The way that we run our training centre is changing. That's where some of the concerns about behaviours have emerged from. So there's a review underway now into the training centre, and we're looking at that becoming not just an initial acquisition of skills centre, but also a place where people are brought back in to be assessed and revalidated in their roles. And of course, that assessment can include some input and training, and that's a great opportunity to share some of these messages and knowledge. And then a revised selection process for progression. So once people are in our service, the way that we identify talent and manage succession will be part of that plan that we develop on Thursday, so that we have a far better way to identify people, to develop people, and to then select them for progression, which will help us on the diversity route. Tom's got something.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just a quick question in terms of the training centre work there. You mentioned that there's you're in the process of developing a new training package, education package. And the question really is, what is there currently? Is there nothing currently that new firefighters or current firefighters get around inclusion and diversity? Or is there something as part of that initial recruitment package that people coming into the service receive?
Good question, Tom. So there is already something. There is an onboarding element to it. So it's not ignored, but I think it could be expanded. So, for example, I've tasked Jonathan Dyson, who's Director of Assurance, and he looks after the training function, with developing a new training program for our new firefighters, which doesn't have an over focus on response, on running hose, on operating pumps, and all that. That's an important skill, of course, that people will learn. And it's normally been called a core skill, the core skill, so everything else seems secondary. The new program will have response skills, prevention skills, protection skills, resilience skills, partnership skills, planning skills, and performance monitoring skills. And within all of that, as a theme that runs through the whole lot, will be equality, diversity, inclusion, values, behaviours, and attitudes. That's going to be a huge focus of the next course, so that when people leave their 10 or 12-week training programme with us at the start of their career, they couldn't be better prepared for going onto a fire station with a head and heart full of all the knowledge, values and attitudes that we're encouraging.
So Andrew, one of the things that's really difficult for people is if they witness behaviour that they feel is inconsistent with the values, is giving them the practical tools that they need to be able to effectively challenge that behaviour without it turning into a conflict situation, because sometimes things can escalate. How are you going to help and support people practically do that?
It's a cracking question. So the new values will have the behaviours designed by the workforce. So the workforce themselves will design the behaviours that they'll then be expected to live. And we will state the behaviours that people expect to see and the behaviours that they expect not to see. That in itself should give people a greater opportunity to be able to challenge, because they'll be able to say to that colleague, stop. That is in the list of things we expect not to see. It will also be an opportunity for people to be praised and rewarded on a day-to-day basis, but also through the performance development review process, and also through our annual awards and other types of letters or certificates of appreciation. But I don't think I fully answered your question, because I think within the education that we provide to our workforce needs to be some practical tips on how to have those conversations, on how to challenge without being criticised or chastised for doing so, but how to challenge in a manner that encourages that, and that encourages a positive response from whoever is receiving that negative challenge, if it is a negative challenge, but also to, of course, share out positive messages as well about the way that people behave. Tommy, pop your hand up.
Yeah, so just a bit of a follow-up from that, really, because you've talked about the process of challenging and making sure that people are open to challenge, are able to challenge productively and constructively. I guess my question therefore is, what next? How will NYFRS as an organisation proactively learn from those challenges, and what is currently being done to learn from those unacceptable behaviours as an organisation when they are identified, and if they came through to a conduct review or the like? How is that learning from what has happened in those scenarios then taken on board by the organisation and formalised?
Thanks, Tom. So we're looking forward to a review that's been undertaken in Julia's office into historical incidents of people leaving the organisation with financial compensation, or people having to be disciplined because of their behaviours. I don't think that review to capture all of those examples has been done before. So that's been really helpful for us, and that will give us a good idea of what's gone on in the past. What will give us a good idea about anything that happens in the future will be Jonathan Dyson's new Assurance Directorate, because that will capture these examples, it will capture the learning, and then he'll be able to share the learning through the education that's provided through his training function. So we haven't been good enough at it in the past. These things have been dealt with and then put in a drawer and forgotten about too often. Individuals will take something from it, but we haven't taken organisational learning from it. What we'll do is we'll take the learning from your work, we'll take the learning from our future work, and we will make sure that it gets embedded in organisation learning and then delivered through the regular training and development and teaching programme.
But that links into the policy work as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, identifying where there's a barrier within a policy or procedure or guidance that might have led to that occurrence, and making sure that that policy, procedure and guidance is revised so it doesn't happen again. Absolutely. Yeah. Right, Tom, I'm conscious of time now. If we skip through, EDI Board's place in ACNAIR governance. This is the slide that I had slightly forgotten about. So this shows where the EDI board sits. So at the bottom of that slide is all of the legislation that we need to comply with. The purple boxes are your bit, Julia, because you own the Fire and Rescue Service Plan and our risk and resource model that we're developing for next year. What we do as a service is to deliver against your bits that deliver our legislative requirements. And we've got a strategic leadership team, a tactical leadership team. We've got all those teams out in the ground delivering and enabling our services through their individual personal development reviews, direct into our communities. And that arrow on the left-hand side shows the golden thread from the very foundation legislation in the Fire and Rescue Services Act right through to the impact it has on communities. What I've created is an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Board that influences, and you can see by those arrows, directly into the strategic and tactical leadership teams. So I chair the EDI board, and I'm able to take things from the strategic team into EDI board. Claire Lister is the vice chair. She sits in the tactical leadership team. She can do the same into the tactical leadership team, and vice versa. As an EDI board, we can influence back into the strategic and tactical teams. But also that EDI board now has 5 staff networks at the moment, and they're only going to increase in number as and when people come forward to do it. Faith and spirituality, LGBTQ+, gender, race and culture, and neurodiversity. And those groups, you can see, have got arrows, links directly into communities. So what I'm really keen happens is when we've got to consult on something like the risk and resource model, like an on-call pay approach, a new approach to on-call pay and contracts. If we were developing a policy around people services, around IT, that we'll be able to take the documents as they're developing, give them to the people in those staff networks, and they can go out and test those with people in relevant groups to their network title. So that's what I'm encouraging those networks to do now, is to forge and create those links into community groups that have relevance to their topic of I suppose, of interest, so that we've got a far greater ability to get a sensor check, feedback from the public about what it is that we're thinking about doing, because the public will then be able to influence through the network, through the EDI board, into the strategic and tactical direction of the service. So I've put EDI at the heart really of all that we do by creating a far more influential network about how we deliver our services. If you click on, Tom.
And you've got 5 minutes, just
yeah,
so you're aware. Yeah.
I think this is the second last slide. So what do we hope to achieve? I talked about that critical mass of diversity. It's the norm. Of course it's open to me. So if you go into a school and you speak to any boy, any girl of any background, it's just, well, of course I can be a firefighter. It's just, there's one of my favourite stories from the fire service was from my former service, actually, in Leicestershire. And there was a mixed heritage female firefighter who started, formerly a prison officer. And she was doing a secondment into the community safety team, and she was at a place called Warning Zone, where young people would be taught about all of the different types of dangers they may face in their life, whether it be cyber crime or sexual grooming or canal safety, fire safety, river safety, the whole lot. And this firefighter was standing in her uniform one day in Warning Zone when a class of 10-year-olds, it would have been 9 10-year-olds, came in for their day at Warning Zone, in pairs, hand in hand. And that firefighter described to me afterwards, I've got goosebumps now, having the most proud experience of her life, when a little girl of colour walked in, looked at her, and looked away again. And then her eyes widened like saucers. She looked again, seeing this mixed heritage female firefighter, and the biggest grin appeared over her face, because what that firefighter described to me was, at that moment, becoming a firefighter had just become a possibility for that 10-year-old girl. And the more that people see women, people of colour, in the service, then the more they see it as being an organisation that is free and open to them to join. So that critical mass is really, really important, which is why our positive action efforts are so critical. We aim to have fewer disciplinaries, and through our staff surveys, just find an improving picture of how people feel about inclusion in work. Change perceptions in the public about the fire and rescue service. So not just people wanting to join our service, but the most vulnerable people in our communities wanting to access the services that we can provide and not fear how they might be viewed by the workforce of the fire and rescue service. And I know that that exists now. I know of LGBT members of the community who would be averse to having firefighters come into their household because they fear, and incorrectly, that they fear that they will face some very traditional types of behaviour. And there are odd examples nationally of that happening, but really it's not something that people need to fear. But again, it's something that we will overcome more and more the greater the diversity we have in our workforce. And ultimately, we want to get better performance in delivering services. But if I go back to that first point, the critical mass of diversity, we have just run that selection process, 30 brand new firefighters, 30 new whole-time firefighters, I should say. 18 of those will be brand new starters. 6 of those are women. So a third of that part of the workforce will be women. 3 of those, half of those, have come through the positive action work that we've done over the last 12 months since they were unsuccessful in our last selection. Those are positive results. That paints a good picture. Of the 12 people that we brought in as transferees from our on-call and from other services, they're all men. That's not to say it's not a diverse group, but they're all men. So we as a service, and with you, Commissioner, are going to need to really look at our approach to recruitment to maximise the opportunity that we've got to attract diversity, while still maximising the efficiency and the effective way that we can run our services. But there are positive green shoots emerging, and I feel good about that. And this is what we expect to see. We expect to see greater diversity, evidence of people living the values, a better engaged workforce who talk about values, who do challenge each other, who do question each other and reward each other as well. And that evidence of challenge and reward based on the behaviours. More creativity, more of those North Allerton firefighters when he comes to work thinking, this is what I'm going to do. And there are so many examples of this happening around the county. COVID has provided people great examples to be creative. I'd love to see more, and I expect to see more. A willingness to share success and disappointments. There's often a reluctance for people to say this worked brilliantly because they fear that people will think they're showing off, or a reluctance to say this didn't work well for fear of being chastised for trying it in the first place. We need to overcome that culture and become more of a learning organisation. A fit-for-purpose estate with accessible facilities for all speaks for itself, and that investment we spoke about earlier becomes important there. But again, ultimately, we expect to see better public performance. And what do I mean by that? The public being better educated to know how to keep themselves safe in the first place, to know how to react when there is an incident, to know how to help us do our jobs when we get there. We'd expect to see fewer incidents overall as a result. Safer people, households, businesses, transport networks and communities. I'm painting a positive picture, but that's what I expect to see. By being better inside, I expect us to be better outside.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we've run out of time. John, you've got until 1:45. I'm sorry, I have to be quite firm around the timings of these meetings because we can lose time quite quickly. So you've got until 1:45. Before I hand over though, I just want to say thank you to the service for the improvements that they've made around diversity. It's really good to see some of that change. So well done.
Thanks.
Thank you. John, over to you now.
Whether is that showing on the screen at all?
Not sure why I'm in your corner there, John.
Sure. Yeah, let me just unshare that again. Right. Is this now sharing? Can you see the?
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I can't see any hands, so if anyone has any questions, please can someone shout it. Okay.
Actually, John, that's really helpful. If I can bring people into the conversation rather than the presenters, it just helps me keep things on time. Sorry, I just need to do that. That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the performance survey for.
Sorry, John. Just your sound is a bit unclear. Can you just make sure you're close to your mic?
Yeah.
Oh, you've gone entirely now.
Sorry, I'm probably going to have to just drop out and come back in again. I've got a network problem. Just one moment.
Julia, you're muted. Julia, you're muted.
He's coming back.
Can you hear me now? Does that sound better?
Yeah, John, that's much better.
Okay, sorry.
I can share the slides.
That would be easier, Tom, if you can do it at your end. Thank you. Okay, so this covers the period for November. For October. We're presenting in November, but it covers the statistic for October. So if you could go to the first slide, thanks, Tom. This just shows that overall our calls for the period in October have reduced, and they're reduced across the false alarms, fires and special service in comparison with the same period in the previous year. Not significantly, but they have, and I suspect largely due to the COVID situation, but it's difficult to predict exact reasons why. If you can go to the next slide, please, Tom. Okay, this is just an overview of our automatic fire alarms. It's a little bit of a spotlight, and what I would propose we do is do a deep dive into the overall automatic fire alarms that we respond to, and perhaps we can present that as a full PAM perhaps sometime into next year. But this shows year on year, really, from about 2017, we've had an incremental rise in the number of automatic fire alarms throughout the service. Not significant, but nonetheless, the rises have been there. And of course, this year in 2020, it has reduced because of the COVID and the lockdown situation. The bottom left-hand graph there shows that the bulk of our automatic fire alarm activations are in the York area, and that's largely due to the fact that the industry down there, the population and the general makeup of the community down there, it means that there are more automatic fire alarms, the York University being a prime example. And then on the right-hand side, that shows where predominantly we get in these calls. So hospitals, houses of where we've got elderly people. These are the types of properties where we are encompassing a large proportion of automatic fire alarms.
Okay, John, I've got Tom and Fiona, please. Can I just say, rather than just the service doing a review of this, can I suggest that we do a bit of a working group around it, and then the results of that come back to Pam, because I think you're a bit, North Yorkshire is a bit of an outlier when you compare you with other services. So we just, if it's okay, would just like a little sort of bit of scrutiny around this, if that's all right.
Yes, sure, yeah. Yeah,
okay, Fiona.
Yeah, it'll probably get answered within a working group, actually, but just interested in what the service does to reduce repeat occurrences at sites.
Okay, so there's a number of different ways we approach this, Fiona, and we are actually reviewing our policy on this one at the current time. But so we would normally, where we get repeat calls, we would make contact with the occupiers of the premises, and we would look to identify if there's any trends in there. And I can give a very brief working example of where we've had a real success on this one. So there is a private school within the North Yorkshire area that we historically were right at the very top of the number of calls that we were attracting. So they were the #1 offender. And through work with the school, we identified that the detectors within the rooms and personal rooms where the students were staying were susceptible to deodorants and other sprays that students were using as part of their sanitation. And so we worked with them to sort of identify the best position for these, but also work with them to try and change behaviours of the students. And then ultimately there was some investment made by the management of the school, and they changed the detector heads. Obviously that was an investment from themselves, and now that whole range of calls has dropped right down, very low number of calls to that establishment now. So that's just an example of how we will work with the premises to try and identify what the problems are, and it might be a working practice that's causing repeat activations, or it could be down to education of people that live or work within those areas. So it's a range of different approaches depending on what the situation is at the time. Okay, just moving on to the next slide, please, Tom. This shows where we are in the national average, and this is where we need to do a lot more deeper understanding of this. But overall, the blue is the national picture on automatic fire alarms, and we're in the orange. But of course, what we've got to remember is that blue encompasses the larger services where they get a lot more higher volume of calls than North Yorkshire. So, in that respect, we are slightly above average, and we need to dig into this now to understand where the additional calls are coming from and learn more about that so that we can be more proactive in our approach. Next slide, please, Tom. Okay, just onto the operational fire cover. Again, October, no real surprises here at all. It's what we would expect at this time of year. Our optimum growing levels are where we try to be, and in the blue as well in the maximum, and that's where we are predominantly. The COVID situation isn't helping on this one, but we are making best efforts to try and make sure that we've got a fair balance of crewing across the board where we can, but within that we're making sure that we've been very preventative of spreading the virus within stations and crews to crews when we have had very low numbers, I'm pleased to say, of COVID within the workforce, and we need to keep it that way. Next slide, please, Tom. So again, our overall on-call station availability slightly increased to the same period last year. We were 79% last year, 82% this year, and 82% broadly from August through to October. We have had 2 new on-call recruits courses back end of October and into November, and I would now start to see, I'd like to start and see the benefit of those recruits that are out onto the on-call stations in the next few months going forward as they attend more courses and become competent and become more valuable to the service. There are 2 new recruits courses to be run January and February, and I have to say that through some of the work out on the district, particularly in the troubled areas where we've really found it difficult to attract people, we're now starting to get people coming forward. So really, really positive in the approach taken at Summerbridge and at Massam, where there's been a lot of work with the community there to try and engage them in coming forward and joining the on-call service. And I'm really pleased to say that that is now starting to pay dividends. We now need to replicate that process across the other service areas to try and maximise benefit.
Tom?
Just quickly, is there any indication, John, from that recruitment that that you've had that uptick because people are I may have lost employment due to coronavirus. Is there any concern that you might see those people starting but then actually dropping off again if they do find full-time employment afterwards?
It's a real tricky one to answer, Tom. I would like to say not. In many respects, the COVID outbreak may well prove positive to us in some respects, because more and more people who have become working from home may well continue to do so into the future. So that could play into our, as a positive. It's sort of too early to say, but it's something we are sighted on. We need to keep an eye on it. Yeah. Okay, next slide, please, Tom. This is just an overview of our business fire safety, and this is one which we want to start and dig a lot deeper into for the way that we report this in the new year. But this is now showing that business safety actual physical audits are still fairly low, again, due to COVID, but we've now revised our risk-based audit schedule, and I would like to see from November forward that we will start and see a significant increase in the number of audits that we're actually taking, both physically and desk-based. That work has just been assigned to the district managers now, so I'd like to see an improvement going forward on that one. Next slide, please, Tom. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I think that was flagged by the HMIC FRS as well, wasn't it? So that's good to know that's being picked up for the public. Thank you. Pleasing to see on this graph the uptake that we've already started with the community safety. You can see the downturn in the March and April, then we started to increase over the summer, and then of course as the risk of COVID has increased again from September, but we are starting now again to make some ins with home risk assessment, safe and well, and doing so in a risk-based approach. But we've not stopped any of this work throughout. We've just had to take account of those people who are shielding, and so therefore some of the referrals that we would historically have retracted haven't been there. But nonetheless, work is continuing in the background to really improve this now going forward under the new normality of COVID as it stands.
Thanks, John. So I think at some point again, I'd like to a little bit more detail around that, and also that chart would benefit from being compared not just linearly across the year, but with previous years, so we can get a sense of where the levels are. Yep. But so I think that is something I'd like to sort of take outside of this meeting and have a look at a bit more, if I may. I'm also really interested in the referrals that haven't been made into other agencies around safeguarding and all of that sort of stuff as well, because that might indicate concerns elsewhere in the system, if you like.
Yeah, and when I'm talking about the referrals, it's the referrals into the service, because of course we're only one agency that go into people's houses, and so that we would continue to do the referrals where we come across people, but it tends to be that we're not getting them back into the service as well, because other services aren't engaged in a similar way due to COVID. But hopefully,
exactly. I suppose are the workarounds around all of this, because these are vulnerable people who probably need a service. So it'd be just interesting to have a look at that in a bit more detail outside of this meeting.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. And finally, it's just a brief summary of the activity that we engaged with on Sunday, the 1st of November. So you'll reflect back, and there was some severe weather warnings served upon the county, with flooding expected in the northeast of the county, and certainly we were informed of it prior, and certainly we received a high number of calls in that 24-hour period. 105 calls received, including flooding to properties, people stuck in floodwater in vehicles, and animal rescues. Interestingly, when we start and break this down, the vehicles are a real interesting one, because of the number of rescues that we attended there. When we analysed this, a large proportion of them, almost 80%, were from the local communities. So it's local people driving through floodwater. So I really do urge the public to not do this when they know that the roads are likely to be flooded. Just don't take the risk. It's not worth it, and it puts our crews and members of the public at increased danger. Again, age groups, when you look at the age groups, somewhere in the regions of 20 to 40. So, you know, it gives us a real focus of where we need to focus our prevention activities. And then there was a large proportion of delivery drivers there that were driving through floodwater. So a brief summary of what we encountered on over that 24-hour period, and some real areas for us to dig into now in terms of forewarning the public about this before the floodwater comes.
John, I think that's really interesting. I mean, I know in my local area there's a road that's blocked all the time, and I can see the people queuing up, thinking about whether they're going to drive through it or not. You know, and actually, we know where these hotspots are, don't we? We know where they happen, and I do wonder whether there's an opportunity here for a concerted sort of communications campaign with some of these communities around avoiding this. I mean, not least because it ruins their cars. Never mind, you know, calling the fire service out unnecessarily. So I you know, do wonder whether that is something that could be looked at.
Yeah, certainly, and one of the areas that we're very focused on now, and district managers are really pushing to get involved with local community groups, and where there are no flood action groups, but yet we know we get repeat flooding calls, we will try and convene local community and mobilise them to help with the problems. You know, if it's local people that are getting stuck in floodwater, then we've got a part to play in helping establish local flood groups who may then be able to help in prevention activities or this type of thing. There's some really good flood action groups out there, and we're keyed into them and engaged with them, and they're really proactive, and they've got a part to play in this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, I mean, in those places that maybe don't have flood action groups, I mean, you've also got quite good links, I would imagine, with your local councillors, because they know all of these things as well, and it's trying to get, and they go to the parish council meetings, and it's just getting a bit of an engagement plan around those hot spots. I mean, I could name them in my area fairly easily. So I just think that there is an opportunity there.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's it's our prime intention to get involved with these as many streams of communication we can into the community. Yeah.
Okay, I'm conscious that I've caused the overrun on the time now. Andrew, can you just be super quick, please?
Super quick. So when I talk about resilience as being the fourth tool in our toolbox of service delivery, the example I often use is this very problem that John's talking about, flooding and cars becoming stuck in floodwater. And the resilience bit is about preventing and protecting it in the first place and us being able to respond, but also that resilience of the community being able to help itself. So actually the community being forewarned of severe weather, for example, and us working in partnership with highways, with local authorities, with councillors, so the community themselves can go out and put in perhaps road blockages to stop people entering the water in the first place. It's happened in other parts of the country really successfully, and it's that community helping itself and and eventually helping us as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people just ignore the signs though, don't they?
In some parts of the country, there are now physical barriers that are able to be put down by local people who are warned and informed of the times to do it and the times to open them up again to overcome that very problem. Right,
that sounds interesting. With lots of farmers who can move things around, haven't we?
Absolutely, have we? Probably quite like to as well.
Thank you very much. So if I think I'm going to hand over to Mark Khan, is that right? Mark Antoinette?
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mark. I will leave it in your.
Hello, Commissioner. I think you said you would leave it in my capable hands. but you didn't actually say the word capable, so I'm assuming that's what you said.
Well, I flipped my microphone off by mistake, so it wasn't.
I'm sure you did. Tom, if you could bring the slide up, that would be great. I've got my timer on. Tom, hello. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Right, I understand that the question that I'm answering here with my PowerPoint are, how are we in NYP developing an inclusive culture based on equality and respect? How do we ensure equal opportunities exist to fulfill the potential of our people? How do we engage with staff networks to ensure that difference is valued? And how do we challenge unacceptable behaviour and learn from it? So I'm hoping that within my PowerPoint, I can answer some of those questions. If I don't directly answer them, I'm sure that you will pull me up and ask me them. Okay, Tom, next slide, please. So this slide here, just briefly going through it, sort of lays out a few strengths that we have. And this slide is about us creating an inclusive environment, and to create that, I think that we need some of the foundations to build on, and I've just sort of listed those there. Leadership, so we're connected into the national leadership around inclusivity and diversity through obviously the Deputy Chief Constable Phil Kane is a national lead for the NPCC in diversity. We have a designated chief officer as recommended by the NPCC, and that's ACC and Anderson. We have diversity champions at multiple levels, and I'll come back to those. Those are our diversity champions that will help us to challenge and also educate our staff. We have the staff networks in place, and they have been, they're quite mature. They've been in place for a few years now, 4 or 5 years off the top of my head, which were developed with our inclusion and diversity coordinator, Nick Dyson, who set those up. And we've got several networks, which again, I list later on in the presentation. We have our Stop and Search reference group, which is headed by Chief Inspector Fiona Willey. Again, that's another requirement. Staff surveys, where we ask our staff all sorts of questions about well-being, welfare and inclusion. And the latest one that we had was in the COVID one, which we got nearly 900 of our staff responding, which was a significant number of people. And within that, of course, there were all sorts of issues that were addressed, but in there were questions about how staff were feeling, how the organisation treated them, which obviously is a big part of feeling included within the organisation. And we've had a good response from our staff that they have been supported during the COVID crisis. The recording of characteristic data, we do record that. I think later on I'll come to point out that this is an area that we really do need to develop, but we do record data. Engagement with community groups, again through IAGs or directly through neighbourhood teams. The gender pay gap, I raise this as a strength because we have gone down. We had a gender pay gap of 21% in, let me get my years right, 2018 to 19, and last year was down to 12%. So we are sort of chipping away at that gender pay gap as well. Still some way to go. And the COVID response, and I put that down as a strength because having sat on many national meetings around recovery, what I found, and North Yorkshire Police is not the only force, but I've found that we have sort of approached this in a pragmatic way. We've really prioritised the well-being and welfare of our staff. In particular, you know, very early on in the lockdown around things like working from home, parents working from home who had small children, who they had to school from home, which I understand. I didn't have to do it myself, fortunately, but I understand can be very stressful. So little examples of that have also come through the staff survey. Tom, could you move on to the next slide, please? This I don't know whether you can see this. This is a data slide just giving our workforce diversity data. And I'll have to bring it closer because I'm struggling with this one. I didn't realise it was so small. Thanks, Tom. If you just those figures that Tom's going are the BAME. Clearly, we have in constables and sergeants, we are almost, well, in constables, we're at towards the 5%, which we think will be the 2021 census data. We need to make some strides in other places. The 6.25 in superintendents, I understand, is me. So it's just one person. So again, as ever, stats can be skewed, but it shows a trend in the right direction. Tom, if you could. Boss.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight sort of the significance and the improvements in this. In 2015, North Yorkshire Police was singled out as one of the very few forces with a very poor workforce representation. Now in 2020, we are one of the very few forces that is representative of our communities. So it's a massive achievement that I don't think we can underestimate. We will talk about how we've achieved that, but also in addition, that we have now, in terms of gender and females, 50% from Chief Inspector above. So those senior ranks, which has been really hard to achieve in other police services, we've made that inroad. So I just wanted to point out about the achievements that's been made, and Mark will describe how we've done that.
Okay. So Annette, I just want to echo that because and I had the pleasure of giving evidence at HASC on the on how you've done this. So really, really well done. It's been very deliberate and very focused, and the results are evident. So well done, North Yorkshire Police.
Okay, thank you. And yes, if we just go, Tom, to the left hand. Sorry, back to that. Back to the just the left hand side, the gender data there that Annette has highlighted. Yeah, so there the significant improvements that we're making. Obviously, the target is 50-50, but we are making improvements and we compare very well with other forces. And of course, the issue around the numbers in terms of diversity data and the numbers of people we have. If people see, and I think Andrew referred to it in his presentation, if people see people like themselves, they are more likely to join us and more likely to stay within the organisation. Can we have the next slide, please?
Sorry, Mark. The one stat that really stands out there is the difference between constable and sergeant, between male and female. Because if you don't get that first step up the ranks right, you're then reducing your chances as you go further up.
Yeah, I think Annette.
Yeah, again, this has been highlighted. So we have some work ongoing at the moment around those particular ranks to make sure that we have got, again, sort of positive action in relation to that and additional support. Chief wants to come in as well.
No, thank you. And I think it's really important to highlight here between Chief Constable and Chief Inspector, we've got 50-50 male-female representation in North Yorkshire Police, which is a fantastic achievement in comparison with the national picture. But absolutely, Julia, we now need to work on ensuring that as we see greater diversity coming into the organisation at constable level, we have to then provide that support and encouragement for people to progress.
Okay.
I mean, it
Oh, you're on mute, Julia.
Okay, messing up. It is really interesting, isn't it, though, as well, because people's life stages might come into this as well. And so it's the support that you give around that work-life balance. I think that could be really important in this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chief.
Mark will, as well, explain about some of the staff support networks that's been introduced, and more recently about families, to particularly, you know, sort of address that point. So it's not just one thing; it's a number of measures that we've got in place in relation to developing our, you know, the route through to the promotion.
Yep, and I'll come on to that slide shortly. Tom, could I have the next slide? And these are our equality objectives, and why are they important for inclusion? Well, the community focus, it's about community access to our services. It's not just about looking and being fair to people that we serve. They're also, it's where we recruit from as well. And so our behaviour within the community is really important, and dealing with community issues and how we deal with them. Diverse community issues is really important, and in terms of that, we now have a hate crime coordinating PC and a sergeant that we didn't have before. We now have one who look at our standards of hate crime investigations, supporting vulnerable people. That's creating a mindset amongst our people around equality, equity, and justice. You know, so. That's sort of driving, and that's about people who are vulnerable at different parts and times in their lives. Knowledge sharing, because inclusion, diversity and equality is extremely complex. We want to create a learning environment, and I'll come to that again when we get to the positive action champions part, and using management data as the evidence base. We have the management data. We know that this is an area that we really need to develop more than we are doing. It's an opportunity, and we're sort of looking to do that through the people's services. So those are our equality objectives. Next slide, please, Tom. Right, so I'll come to some of the sort of initiatives that we have run. Obviously, positive action is not a new initiative. It's been around for some time, but in the last 12 months, we have revamped it. So we have come up with this positive action logo, making it fair for everyone. And the whole idea of it is for positive action to have a consistent message, consistent message around respect, belonging and progression. And what we're doing with our positive action logo is that we are encouraging our positive action champions, for example, to use it on the bottom of their email addresses. And we use this, as you can see, it's sitting behind me as well on the screen. It's about a corporate image around positive action and selling the message in a consistent way. Next slide, please, Tom.
Sorry, Mark, just before you do that, it might just be worthwhile for the public to understand the difference between positive action and positive discrimination.
Of course. Right. Positive action comes out, it's a piece of legislation that allows organisations such as the police to take action when there is two people. In the simplest way, if two people come for an interview, they both have the same score. If there's an underrepresented group, so for us, for example, we have underrepresented groups in terms of female firearms officers. So if two people got the same score at interview, we would be able to choose the female over the male because we are underrepresented in numbers of females in firearms as firearms officers. We can also take steps to support people prior to interview to help them get them to a level, to an equal play level with other candidates. So, for example, if we have black or minority ethnic candidates where English is their second language, we can provide some advice and support in understanding the process, for example. We can't fill out the application forms. We can't do things like that, but we can provide support and understanding for those groups of people. It is definitely not discrimination. It's about getting everybody to the start line so they can run their race.
Yeah, okay, so because discrimination would be illegal.
discrimination would be illegal. And also, we don't want that. We want the best people from all kinds of backgrounds. So it's about getting people to the start line so they can run their own race. So there we are. That's positive action. And next slide, please, Tom. So as part of positive action, we set up a team. It's a collegiate team. It involves myself, the positive action coordinators. I've got people from the people services. I've got people from corporate comms, and we've come together and we have decided what do we need to, for example, create a challenging environment, creating people who can challenge in the workplace. And one of the idea we came up with is positive action champions. We went out for recruitment and we got 69. When we're talking about recruitment, we asked people to put an expression of interest in. We asked them to write 250 words about why they wanted to make a contribution around inclusion and diversity and positive action. And some of the reasons, well, all the reasons were inspirational, but some of them were even more extra inspirational. And we got people wanting to be positive actions for all sorts of reasons, because they had a disabled child at home, because they had seen their wife struggle in their career within the police, all sorts of reasons. Here are the figures in terms of how many we have in each particular group. So we have 43 police officers, 22 police staff, 3 volunteers, 32 men and 37 women, 7 LGBTQ and 9 black and minority ethnic individuals. We've brought these individuals in, we've briefed them all initially, and now we are going to hold every 2 months, we're going to hold sort of master classes to talk about all sorts of inclusion and diversity issues. We are encouraging the champions themselves to come up with subjects. So for our first workshop, we have someone who's going to talk to us about dealing with deafness. We're going to have someone also talking to us about what it's like for English to be their second language when joining the police. Next slide, please, Tom, which is part of the positive action. The positive action team, we've agreed that priorities of the positive action champions remain education. So we want to use our positive action champions within the workplace, in the field, for want of a better word, to improve the education of our colleagues. And basically what I've said earlier, bi-monthly cultural workshops, bi-monthly emails focused on education and sharing information, approaching more senior staff, encourage them to be positive action champions. We have 1 superintendent. We have 2 chief inspectors and 1 superintendent so far that are positive action champions. We're trying to encourage more at those senior ranks, and the recruiting will begin again in January. So we will hopefully recruit more. Next slide, please, Tom. So we moved on. I'll move on now to our talent team, who have won some prizes, and these are the 2 prizes that they've won in terms of their recruitment. And this is, as you've already said, Commissioner, you already identified, this is around our recruitment in terms of black and minority ethnic and women and LGBTQ. We have done extremely well over the last 2 to 3 years, and we've been rightly recognised. Next slide, please, Tom. I'm rattling it through it. I've got my timer on. So, and the ongoing recruitment. Despite COVID, our talent team continue to recruit, and the recruitment timetable is there in front of you. The specials is now closed. The PCSO's recruitment closes on the 7th of December. Student officers on the 1st of January. Corporate communications and the talent teams continue to work together to develop recruitment comms and activity in relation to targeting underrepresented groups. And if I could have the next slide, please, Tom. And this is the umbrella recruitment campaign. This is the logo for this year's recruitment campaign. BU, BNYP, BU, be on the front line. So this is about it says it there. It's pretty straightforward. It's about, we want you as an individual to come and be part of MYP and bring yourself into our environment and help us out. And the consistent message in all of the recruitment comms will be people like you to keep communities safe every day. Next slide, please, Tom. Before I go there, I thought the next slide would be in terms of numbers of people that we have recruited. And I've got the numbers here in front of me, Commissioner. I'll just go through them very quickly. We've had about 500 people.
You're all right on time, Mark.
Okay.
You're okay. Yeah.
We've had about 500 people for the PC process who have expressed an interest to join the sessions. For each of the sessions, we had about 70 or 80 people, the sessions that we've had so far. And looking at the statistics, those who have disclosed ethnicity and their protected characteristics, we've had 7.86 BAME out of the 500, 9.5 LGBT plus, 49% female, and 3.4% that have disclosed a disability. So it's pretty good. I mean, those are the people that have joined us, and we have had feedback. We've used diverse panels, i.e. people on the panels, not just in terms of diversity in terms of rank or position they have within the organisation, but also diversity in terms of gender, LGBT and race. And we've also used some, white, heterosexual male colleagues as well, just to show a sort of a complete diverse position. And we've had really good feedback from the candidates who have said that they were inspired by some of the people on the panels. Different people have inspired them, which is great. The special constabulary, that's ongoing, as you can see. There's 145 so far. I think that's gone up to 190. And of the 145, those are the stats I have, 15% from black and minority ethnic, 37 female, 6 LGBT plus, and 6% disability. So the one thing I can say about the figures is that we are sort of mature enough to be able to provide figures for protected characteristics at this point. That's at the point where people are just expressing an interest, which is good. But these type of figures help us to think about how we can change our recruitment messages within a recruitment drive or ready for next time. So that's where we are with the recruitment. Next.
Can I just ask a question
Yes.
about the Uplift programme? So obviously the way in which people are sort of engaging with or being recruited into the service has changed as a consequence of the PUP and also the COVID. Are you, and I know there's been quite a big variation between different forces and the diversity of applicants going into the sort of the process at the early days. Where do we sit in comparison to, say, for example, some of our regional neighbours?
From my perspective, Commissioner, sorry, we sit favourably. I don't think we're a sort of outlier as such. I know West Yorkshire Police have done very well with the figures as well, but if we compare with some of the others, we're doing better. And we are, for example, with our positive action work that we've done, we are looking to be the lead in the region around comms and engagement for that part. West Yorkshire Police are taking the lead around recruitment because they look after a lot of our recruitment. So we are working with regional colleagues. So we punch well above our weight. From my, I don't have any figures for you, but in the meetings that I sit in, I think we're doing pretty well.
Okay, it's just so, for example, I knew West Yorkshire we're not being as successful in terms of diversity, say, as Greater Manchester or West Mids, and they haven't got dissimilar populations. So it was trying to sort of understand whether some of those what West Yorkshire was doing, given the context of North Yorkshire with West Yorkshire around some of that, and whether it was impacting on us.
Not that I can tell.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
Next slide, Tom, please. Right, these are our current support networks, and there's a list there, and I'll go down to the bottom because that's the one that was mentioned earlier. That's the North Yorkshire Police Family Network. That's our newest network. That has grown, that's come into existence in the last couple of months. And this was one of our sergeants, Sam Knott, who won't mind me saying so, she's a single mum at home, and she joined us in the partnership hub, and she was homeschooling and doing all the business at the beginning of lockdown, and she thought, do you know what, we needed some kind of family network, because she obviously spoke to other colleagues. The Metropolitan Police do have a family network, and Sam did her research, and she's found a strategic lead who's going to be our new Chief Inspector, Lorraine Crossman-Smith. Got the support of Annette, and the network is up and running. So it's come from our staff, it's come from someone who has a real interest in this, and they've done the research, which probably reflects all our networks. These are individuals within our organisation who are really interested in the particular characteristic that's displayed. So, and it's growing, and we use our networks to influence our thinking around all sorts of diversity issues. And I would say that the difference between the positive action champions is that positive action champions are more about the organisation doing what I think is our duty, our statutory duty, to ensure that we get everyone a fair chance. Whereas I think our networks are about our sort of critical friends, making sure that our community, our working community, is inclusive. So that the two things sort of work hand in hand together. Tom?
Sorry, yeah, I just so it was interesting. We heard from the fire service earlier about the way in which their networks are kind of plugged very much into the strategic leadership team and tactical leadership team. I just wondered in what way these networks are plugged in a similar kind of framework. How is the information and the discussion and the work that's going on within these networks and the feedback from these networks really plugging into improving that inclusive organizational culture within NYP, please?
Okay, well, to start off with, in terms of governance, the networks sort of feed in to the People Board and the Inclusion and Diversity Board, which is chaired by Annette, and they feed through Nick Dyson, who's the Positive Action Coordinator, and myself. We feed through. We do have network chairs attending that meeting as well, because we have those strategic leads. So we for example, we have strategic lead for gender, who is Maria Earls. So Maria actually, although she attends the Inclusion and Diversity meeting, Maria is also in other meetings in the organisation, because inclusion and diversity can come up in all sorts of places. So it sort of, we spread it across the organisation, even though there's a proper governance structure. We also have our diversity calendar, which has taken us some time to put together, but it's finally put together, where we are looking to support the networks from a corporate perspective by flagging key days where particular religious days, or particular days where we like hate crime or Black History Month, things like that. So the corporate the organisation supports the networks by providing the platform on which the networks can pronounce or articulate their priorities or their stories, if that makes sense, Tom. It's a whole organisation approach. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a deputy chief constable who's part of the race network, whose intersectionality the conference that he did there, again, that feeds in. So there is a structure, but I think we are wanting to be more inclusive. We're trying to widen that basis of the people involved.
Thank you. Annette, you've got your hand up. Lisa, you've got your hand up as well.
Apologies, that's a hangover.
Okay, all right. Annette, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to mention as well, this really is a sort of a two-way, sort of relationship with the networks, and I've found really strong in North Yorkshire. So in terms of our policies, procedures, introduction of new ones or refreshing ours, we have that discussion and views and feedback from all the networks. So that informs the equality impact within those. So again, I just think it's really important that it really is a very well-rounded governance and support network that informs decisions across the organisation.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you.
I think that's it, Tom. Is that final? No, there's one more. Sorry, yes, there is. Challenges, cultural norms. I don't think there's any surprises. We still have to address, certain behaviours or attitudes, and it isn't all. These aren't behaviours or attitudes that are disciplinary or wrong. They just don't support inclusivity. And again, I'm hoping that the positive action champions, the key with the positive action champions is to make sure that we keep them engaged. They are volunteers, and we have to make sure that we keep them engaged and keep them interested. And one of the things that we've done is we've got them access to a library where we make recommendations around reading books that so we're wanting to set up a kind of book club anyway, so that they can share ideas with each other. The understanding of the complexity of inclusion and diversity, this is massive. This is all part of that education and knowledge, and people inadvertently saying things that. Yesterday I had a conversation with a colleague who was saying, sometimes people are frightened of talking about race, and that sort of frustrates them. Let's have a conversation. Let's have that honest conversation. Fiona, your hand's up.
Is that all right, Julia?
Yeah, that's fine. I think this will be the last question, then we'll move on if that's all right.
Okay, it was just a similar question to as we asked the fire service, which was around challenges and challenging. To what extent have you used? Can people challenge unacceptable behaviour, and what sort of organisational learning have you taken from things such as grievances, formal disciplinaries, employment tribunals, and taking those themes and applying them to learning?
Okay, Fiona, I think that comes in various formats. But the first one is the official one, which is the anonymous messenger that goes to our PSD. Last year, 2019-20, we had 89 people using that means to inform PSD. Those are not all inclusion and diversity issues, but there are some within there. And this year to date, we've had 63. So that is being used. So that's one part of the challenge. And I think those are probably the more serious things that happen. What we've tried to also do is those things that happen, as I've tried to say earlier, around how do we challenge things that happen that aren't serious enough for disciplinary but require that discussion and conversation. I've got to say, and I know the chief's on the line, and I'm not saying this, I'm not trying to be sycophantic, but the chief did, for example, meet with all the black and minority ethnic officers. I was there at that meeting, and there was an honest conversation. People were able to raise with her the issues, and I've got to say the chief was very honest back in terms of what can and can't be done, and what has to be done to get to where we want to get, because these are very complex issues. So that's the second part. In terms of learning, we have, for example, a couple of examples within the positive action coordinators. I've got one where one of the positive action coordinators spoke to a colleague, a friend who was a firearms officer, female firearms officer, who works at Tadcaster, and she said that the locker rooms at Tadcaster for females are appalling. Now, Tadcaster police station has been around for years. I was the senior officer there as well. I didn't pick this up. So she complained or suggested it to Dan. Dan went down, did an equalities impact assessment, found that they were wholly inappropriate, spoke to estates. We now have new locker rooms for both male and female. Not new, but locker rooms that are suitable, if that makes sense. So going back to your point, Fia, we're trying to encourage an environment where people can challenge in an everyday basis. The chief's got a hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, just briefly, we also benefit from the fact that Phil Kane, our deputy, is the DEI lead nationally for workforce. So all of the best practice from a national perspective is being fed into our practices locally.
Yeah.
I think it would be fair to say that Phil has also contributed to that best practice. So, for example, the report on complaints against BAME officers, for example.
Yeah, and just the final point, Fiona, around learning in police training, for example, around firearms training or public order training. Each year we do a CPD but from command right down to operational level, in which issues that have cropped up around might be how we deal with people with autism, how we deal with people with other types of disability, or people from black and minority ethnic communities. Those are sort of weaved into the training, and it's learning from issues and incidents that have happened somewhere else in the country. And interestingly enough, our firearms officers got a could only be described as a good score in the unconscious bias survey, which is very good, which I think reflects not only the great firearms officers that we have, but also I think reflects the training.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting in that survey. I mean, there were other groups that didn't have quite so good scores, which were also interesting as well. So it was a really interesting survey.
Yes.
It was
good.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'll move on. Commissioner, gaining trust in order to record some characteristics. This is about gaining the trust of individuals within the organisation for them to be able to reveal themselves in the hidden diversity that we have. We still think there are people who don't feel they don't trust the organisation enough to come forward, and we've got to work on that. Retention and progression of some diverse groups. Yep, retention and progression is an area we really need to work on. Diversity in rank, grade, and specialism. We, as I think it was the ACC said, or the chief, that we have 50% female representation in rank. We now need to look at other diversity. Same with grade, especially amongst our police staff colleagues. We need to look at ways of developing them. And specialisms. Firearms is the classic example. And I think this definitely the last slide. No, it isn't. There's another one after this.
You've now got to scoot through these, but
right. These are the opportunities we have. We're going to have we have the leadership program that's been worked on. Ethics board that Annette is going to chair. Independent advisory groups. We had those for years, but we're looking to develop those more. scrutiny panels, again, getting that feedback, coaching and mentoring, continual learning program, positive action champions, and COVID recovery. Those are all opportunities. I could go on about those for quite some time. Commissioner, are there any by exception that you want some detail on? Nope. Okay. Tom doesn't. It's all right,
that's
Tom.
fine. I still want to have a conversation about the ethics board, but we won't do that here. We'll have another conversation about that elsewhere.
Okay, and finally, our aims, Tom, we can go on the last slide. Develop our leaders, which is what we're doing through our leadership program. Utilize available information and insights effectively. That's the data stuff, and we really need to work on that, and we are looking at that. Encourage participation of workforce in finding solutions. I think the Positive Action Champions is a great example of that. Scrutinise, review policies and practices, and that's the equality impact assessments. We need to, again, we do equality impact assessments. I think we need to just do them more regularly. What's the word? We get pockets of very good equality impact assessments, and some areas where they could be improved. So we're working on that as well. And that's it, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to everybody who's put so much work into this over a considerable period of time, because significant progress has been made. So it's a real good success story for NYP, and something on which to really build for the future. So thank you, everybody. Annette, I think we're now moving on to the performance element of it. And then there's a sort of sub-agenda item, which is Jane, who's going to report back on freedom of information and subject access request compliance. And we've got until about 10 to 4 for this part of the meeting. So Annette, over to you.
Okay, then in the interests of time, if there's that further agenda item, should I keep to exception reporting for because there's still quite a lot of slides?
Yes, please, that'd be great.
Okay. Moving to mental health, really positive. Over now, since January, there's only been one 136 brought into custody, none since April. So again, really encouraging that we're making the best use of our sort of provision and facilities to make sure that those being brought in are taken to the correct place of safety.
Yeah, just on that quickly, we heard at EB an update from Jenny around some of TUBE's issues in terms of recruiting into our triage teams, and I'm just wondering whether that's having any impact, because we obviously we have our mental health champions, don't we? And I'm just wondering if there's any impact around some of those recruitment difficulties that TUBE are having.
It's not being brought to my attention, but I'll take it away and ask those questions.
Thanks.
Okay. Again, in 136, in terms of return to community, quite high. I think what we've found month by month, it fluctuates enormously. But again, satisfied that we've got the right sort of scrutiny around this particular area now. The same with modes of transport as well. We are still making those risk assessments case by case basis, which is working well. And we've just used on 2 occasions this time out of the area to Middlesbrough. In terms of incidents and crimes, so again, this has been, as you can imagine, sort of a quite a sort of strange month, to say the least. In October, we had the announcement about the 10 o'clock closure of the pubs. What that did create is a change in our demand, predictable. However, you know, we made a sort of a quick response in order to make sure that we had sufficient resources in place, plans in place, to deal with what we saw, greater sort of demand within that particular period, and greater, reports around antisocial behaviour. You'll also see when I get to the FCR slide, that also impacted on some of our call handling data, because lots of the calls came in at the same time, which was a change, which is now reversed again. So it has been very busy. However, across the force compared to last year, it's still 6% decrease. So we are still having fewer incidents reported across the force area. And that is, reflected, obviously, 31st of October, it was Halloween, and also the announcement of the full lockdown. So again, that was just a particular busy day. Again, we had plans for that, and we were able to, maintain a good level of service. Moving to crime, again, still maintaining a huge reduction. I anticipate this month during lockdown, although it wasn't like the lockdown in March, April, May, it has been busier. We still have seen those reductions in crime. Some of the sort of positive areas is we have seen much more proactive and good outcomes in terms of trafficking and controlled drugs from a number of good operations in place to tackle county lines and others. So we've seen an increase from 170 to 212, which is a rise of 42. So again, that's really positive in terms of proactive policing throughout this period. One of the concerning increases, which I know that the Chief Constable has reported on and is really concerned about, although violent crime has reduced, there has been a significant increase on assault with injury on a constable and assault without, so a 69% increase on without, and a 35% increase with injury on a constable. And that's kind of been a national picture throughout this, and we are working to sort of address that and send those messages out to the public. So moving to the domestic abuse, again, the anticipated increase, we haven't seen that taking place, but we've still got all the multi-agency partnerships in place, which is still working well together to respond and provide the service to the public and victims of crime.
And can I just a quick question on that one then? So we've seen a clear, obviously there's a clear trend upwards for domestic abuse, but are you saying that there hasn't been an increase? Because certainly IDAS are experiencing an increase in referrals, and indeed we've had to provide more money to IDAS to ensure that they've got the resources they need to support victims and survivors.
Yeah, we haven't seen that increase. So you have seen from probably about October 18, and then certainly from last year there was a steady increase, and that was a change in recording and reporting. So the volume that we're seeing at the moment is what we anticipated pre-COVID, that there would be an increase because of the recording practices, but not any real increase around the crime. So we haven't seen the particular increases that we've seen in other places.
Okay, so offline then, and I'll just take this offline a little bit to look at the data that the commissioning team is providing me with and this data, because there seems to be a slightly different story. So if we can just, I'll take that offline if that's all right.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. We have had this discussion again, sort of in other internal forums about the sort of the difference of the way that they're using different services. So it would be helpful, I suppose, to have that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So in terms of antisocial behaviour, we have seen the increase, and as you say, we've had the COVID-related tag, which I explained last month. A lot of the ASB and the increases is COVID-related, as we expected from that. I think it's levelling off a little bit at the moment, but again, we can anticipate that we will still see an increase in antisocial behaviour, depending on what happens over the next few months. This slide just explains about the proactive policing, and again, we're seeing a lot more proactive policing, particularly from our firearms support unit. And if I'll just jump now to the 999 data, so we're still seeing an overall decrease of 8.33 compared to last year. As I just mentioned, we did have a change of how when the calls came in November. In October, because of the changes in COVID restrictions. We've seen a significant improvement again this month, so there was a slight delay in answering those calls around 999, and again in 101s, not to what we saw by any means back in July or August. It was a decrease, a deterioration, which we were a bit concerned about, but that's now been reduced again fairly significantly this month in November, which we'll report back to. Just onto the people slides, we're all on track in terms of our recruitment plans, both in police officers and PCSOs. So we're in a really healthy position in relation to making sure that we have the recruitment plans, and we're got everything ready for new recruits coming in. And just moving to sort of sickness data, again, what we have found is a reduction throughout the COVID period. That's continued. We had a slight lift in September again, but we're seeing sort of reductions across the force, and that again is an awful lot that we're doing in terms of welfare of our staff. Mark explained before about the surveys and making sure that we've got real, good oversight in relation to the health and well-being of our staff throughout this period. And finally, we've already had the workforce data. So that is a sort of a quick summary and exception reporting. If there's any further questions.
I don't. Does anybody have any further questions? No. Okay, fantastic. So thank you for that, Annette, and thank you for everybody who's doing such a huge amount out in the communities, and especially in these challenging circumstances. So thank you very much. Okay, Jane, I think we are on to your agenda item here, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much, Julia. Obviously, we are looking at the North Yorkshire Police, the Force side, not the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioners, FOI and SAR compliance. So if we go to the first slide, this is showing the history of the backlog. So rather than reading left to right, it's actually reading right to left, because we've started off with the good news, as in October of this year, our number of requests outstanding and the number of overdue requests, that is our current balance at the end of October. We then move across the chart to show where we've come from. So I think if you look at the bottom two figures, is probably the worst part about it was that last year we'd actually got such a backlog that we had to do something about it, because we recognise how important compliance with FOIs and SARs, freedom of information requests and subject access requests are. So what we did is we got an action plan together. We now report monthly to the Deputy Chief Constable as the Security Information Responsibility Officer. And we started off with an action plan and actually self-referred ourselves to the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO. We were one of about 12 forces that was in this state, and it has been recognised that it has been an issue across policing. And so it's not just us, but it's about actioning and putting in appropriate resources. So as you can see, going from right to left, you can see the improvement of over this last year about the number of requests outstanding from when we were about over 1,000 outstanding, as in late after the compliance period. We're now down to more of a reasonable figure. We are not complacent in this. We have to maintain this. But obviously, what we used the COVID period to really get on top of the backlog. So I think if Tom could move to the next slide on FOIs. The blue blocks are the number of FOIs received. So if you look at the blue columns only for the moment, you will see that during March, April, May, the time of lockdown in the middle of the chart, we had a huge reduction in numbers of FOIs. So the team really used that time productively. And so you can see the red blocks, which are those processed from 2019-20, which were overdue, and the ones in green that were processed for this financial year. A real effort was made and we got on top of the backlog. So you'll see the figures at the bottom of that chart is the compliance figures. And obviously you will see that back in November 2019, our compliance was pretty bad at 18%. And we all appreciate this is just not good enough. So obviously we've worked extremely hard and I have to commend the team. They really have put the effort in over the last year. And you can see the compliance figure gradually increasing. As we've got rid of the backlog, then actually that compliance figure should now shoot up because we're not now having to process the old ones. So this is obviously the Information Commissioner's Office is obviously the ideal should be at 100%. They recognise that 90% is well on the way. So that's what we're aiming for is 90 to 100%. But you can start seeing now we've got rid of the backlog. That we can really improve those figures on FOIs, on the freedom of information requests.
Jane, a quick question before you move on. Just so obviously, I mean, I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into doing this, and it has been an ongoing issue for a while. So thank you very much to everybody. I suppose a note of assurance from you, really, Jane, around. Obviously, during COVID, you were able to use that time to deal with the backlog. It's whether or not you put in place any improvements to ensure we don't get a backlog again, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I mean, obviously, the Information Commissioner has been issuing recommendations and assisting us. They issued a practice recommendation for us. So there is assistance from the ICO to improve this. And they recognised our improvement, but obviously it's about us maintaining this going forward. So there is a review going on about where civil disclosure should sit in the organisation, and we have a monthly meeting, as I said, with the Deputy Chief Constable. So we put proper governance in this, so we are able to monitor on an ongoing basis where we are with the compliance and how we maintain this and improve this going forward, and then maintain it at appropriate levels. We've had recommendations from the ICO to publish an action plan. They've recommended that we publish statistics. So we're going to put all these improvements in place and really keep on top of the compliance figures going forward. So the practice recommendation from the ICO only concerns freedom of information requests. Meanwhile, we are still looking at the compliance rates of the subject access requests, which is access for personal information, as opposed to the freedom of information requests, which is more statistical. So, Tom, if you move to the final slide, this is the subject access request compliance, which again, looking at the figures at the bottom, you can see Again, not perfect, and we're not complacent, but that was higher. And obviously we've also got to improve that. So as a team, which are obviously all multi-skilled, we are looking at both issues, but at the moment the ICO is only monitoring us on the freedom of information, the FOIs, but obviously we are doing both in tandem. The ICO has just published a really interesting report for everyone to see on the ICO's website of it's a report on police compliance with FOIs and SARs, and they make the point that it has been noticed across most forces that not only have there's been an increase in requests, but there's also been an increase in other work that the Civil Disclosure Unit have to deal with, such as court orders in family care proceedings, etc., and regulatory disclosure. So the whole issue since GDPR, and people have become more aware of what organisations are holding on people, there has been an increase in requests for information across the board, across all forces. So I think it's recognising that, and we've had to put that resourcing in. And as I say, we are monitoring it monthly now, so we do not slip back. And obviously we need to get it up to the required level and then maintain that.
So just another question, sorry Jane, but obviously if the freedom of information requests are subject to scrutiny by the ICO and the SARs aren't, the worry is that you get a perverse incentive around the subject access requests, if you see what I mean.
Well, then it's not ICO monitor both. But
right, okay.
what's happened is because our FOIs, as you can see on this current slide, the SAR compliance, well, we're not saying this is good, but it was going up to about 82% in April and 81% in June. So we're trying to, that is better than what the FOIs were. So the ICO has only issued a monitoring notice, effectively, a practice recommendation on the FOIs, but we are well aware that they are monitoring this as well. And we've got to make sure that this does not slip down. Otherwise, we'll be issued with a second notice. Obviously, a practice recommendation is short of an enforcement notice. So we haven't been so bad because I think that ICOs recognise the improvement we've made, that we've got an enforcement notice, but we are well on the way to maintaining and increasing these figures.
Okay, that's really helpful. It's also good that these stats are going into the public domain because we know we've got some interested parties around this, so that's really helpful. Just by way of comparison, do we? I was talking to some colleagues in Cleveland, and they mentioned that they get much fewer numbers of FOI and SAR requests. Do we know, where we sit in the sort of numbers?
Well, as I say, I'd refer you and anybody who's watching this to go on to the, I think PFCCs and Chief Constables have been sent a copy of the report from the Information Commissioner, and that is published. So if people want to go and look on that, what that report includes is the statistics from all forces. So you can actually click on there and actually find out where the numbers across forces. And certainly in comparable forces of our size, we do get increased numbers and more complex, because every time you get a freedom of information request, for instance, it's not necessarily one question. That FOI itself could comprise of up to 20, 30 questions in itself. So it's a bit of a misnomer saying we've got so many FOIs, because the actual questions could be a lot higher. But the statistics are all there on the Information Commissioner's site for everyone to see the comparative numbers of each force. But yes, we do get more than some of our neighbouring forces.
Okay, all right. I just think that that's useful information to draw out for the Police and Crime Panel, for example. So when we go back to them, because they have a sort of watching brief on this, that we should start drawing down on some of that other information to put some context in around this. I think that'd be quite helpful. So I will take that an action for my team when we're next looking at this to go to the panel.
Absolutely, and as I say, it's all there in one nice, neat place in the ICO's report. So it's very easy. Yes, I
understand that, but people won't want to go and dig it out from the ICO's report. We'll have to do that for them. So. But that's helpful. Thank you very much. Okay. Does anybody have any further questions for James, or any comments? No. Okay. All right. That's really helpful. I don't think we've had any further questions from the public. Just to say that there is no public accountability meeting in December. And so the next one will be January, but we will continue to publish these performance packs on our website in December, so all the numbers will still be in the public domain, even if we don't have one of these meetings. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank people for coming to this meeting, but also for all of the work that goes into putting together all of the packs and papers for it, because I know it takes some time. So I'd like to thank everybody for all of that and for your contributions today. Thank you very much.